Night slowly settles over the world. Above the darkened oceans and silent continents, the earth turns quietly through space, carrying with it the memory of countless forgotten ages. Cities glow like scattered constellations across the surface of the planet, while far beyond the clouds, the stars watch in patient silence, just as they have watched for millions of years. Somewhere beneath this sky, in rooms lit only by the soft glow of screens and bedside lamps, people ask the same question they have asked for generations. Who were we before history began? The story we are told is simple. Humanity rose from stone tools and fire. We learned to hunt. We learned to farm. We built villages, then cities, then civilizations. And at last, after thousands of years of slow progress, we reached the modern world. It is a comforting story, a neat story, a story with a clear beginning. But sometimes, when we walk among ancient ruins, when we stand before towering stones that predate written language, when we trace the outlines of cities buried beneath sand and sea, a quiet doubt begins to grow. What if this is not the first chapter? What if the world we know is only the latest version of a much older story? Across the planet, from the jungles of South America to the deserts of Egypt, from the plains of Turkey to the mountains of Peru, there are structures that do not fit easily into the timeline we were given. Stones cut with impossible precision, monuments aligned with the movements of the stars, cities that seem to appear fully formed, as if their builders already possessed knowledge far beyond what history allows. And beneath the surface of the oceans, where ancient coastlines now sleep beneath rising seas, lie the outlines of forgotten settlements, roads, walls, foundations, entire landscapes that once stood beneath open skies. These are not the remains of simple hunter-gatherers. They are the fingerprints of organized societies, civilizations. Long before the pyramids rose beside the Nile, long before the first kings ruled in Mesopotamia, long before writing carved human memory into stone and clay. The deeper we look into the past, the more the timeline begins to stretch, the more questions replace answers, the more the certainty of our origins begins to fade into mist. Why do so many cultures tell stories of a great flood that erased an earlier world? Why do ancient myths speak of golden ages that ended in catastrophe? Why do the oldest monuments on Earth appear suddenly without clear ancestors? Perhaps the greatest mystery of all is not how civilizations rise. It is how many may have already fallen. Tonight, as the modern world sleeps, we begin a slow journey backward through time, beyond the written record, beyond the first cities, beyond the edge of known history, toward a forgotten age, toward a civilization that may have existed before us, and toward a question that should not exist but refuses to disappear. Were we really the first? The official story of human history. The history we learn is carefully arranged like a long, orderly road. It begins in deep prehistory, when small groups of humans wandered across vast landscapes, following the migrations of animals and the changing seasons. They lived in caves and temporary shelters, leaving behind little more than stone tools and traces of fire. For tens of thousands of years, we are told, life changed very slowly. Then, around 12,000 years ago, something remarkable happened. The Ice Age began to fade. Glaciers retreated. Forests spread. Rivers carved new paths through warming lands. In this gentler world, humans learned to cultivate plants, to domesticate animals, and to settle in one place. Villages appeared along riverbanks and fertile plains. Mud brick houses clustered together. Storage pits filled with grain. Pottery replaced woven baskets. Trade routes formed between distant communities. And from these villages, the first cities were born. In Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, people built the world's earliest urban centers. In Egypt, along the steady flow of the Nile, farmers and craftsmen gathered beneath the protection of powerful rulers. In the Indus Valley, carefully planned cities rose with straight streets and advanced drainage systems. In China, along the Yellow River, early dynasties laid the foundations of a long and enduring civilization. According to the official story, this is the dawn of history. Writing appears, kings rule, laws are written, empires rise. The past becomes visible. Before this moment, we are told, there were only scattered tribes and simple communities. No grand architecture, no complex engineering, no advanced astronomy, no organized global culture. It is a story of steady progress, moving from primitive to advanced, from simple to complex, from chaos to order. And for a long time, this story made perfect sense. Archaeologists uncovered stone tools that grew more refined over time. They traced the spread of agriculture across continents. They reconstructed the rise of early states and empires from broken tablets and crumbling walls. The pieces fit together neatly. But as new discoveries emerged, cracks began to appear in this carefully built narrative. Some of the oldest known sites on Earth were not villages at all, but monumental complexes. Vast stone circles. Massive pillars carved with animals and symbols. Structures that required organized labor, advanced planning, and deep astronomical knowledge. Even more puzzling, these sites appeared before the supposed invention of agriculture. Before permanent cities. Before civilization was meant to exist. If humans were still simple hunter-gatherers, how did they organize such projects? Who planned them? Who designed them? Who taught them the skills required to shape and move enormous stones? The official timeline began to feel incomplete. It told us when cities appeared. It told us when writing began. It told us when empires ruled. But it did not explain where the knowledge came from. And it did not explain why, at the very beginning of civilization, humanity seemed to already possess an understanding of mathematics, astronomy, architecture, and engineering. It was as if history had started in the middle of a story.
Tonight, as we move deeper into the past, we begin to sense that the road of human history may not be a straight line at all. It may be a circle, or perhaps a series of forgotten rises and falls buried beneath the surface of time. The official story gives us a beginning. But what if the real beginning lies far beyond its edge?
The timeline that feels too short. When you first hear the numbers, they sound enormous. 200,000 years of modern humans, tens of thousands of years of migration and survival, 12,000 years since the last ice age began to loosen its grip. Yet, when you place these numbers side by side, something subtle happens. The story becomes strangely uneven. For most of our existence, humanity is described as living in a quiet, repetitive rhythm, hunting, gathering, moving with the seasons, leaving behind only fragile traces that time can easily erase. Then, in what feels like a sudden moment, cities appear, writing begins, architecture rises, civilizations form, almost as if the world had been waiting for a signal. It is not the length of human history that feels strange. It is the speed of the transformation. Imagine the span of 200,000 years as a single night. For nearly the whole night, there is only darkness and slow movement beneath the stars. Then, in the final few minutes before dawn, the world bursts into light. Villages become cities, cities become empires, tools become machines, machines become computers. In a brief flicker at the end, humans reach space. It feels like a leap too large for the time allowed. And this is where the quiet doubt begins to grow. If humans were capable of building civilizations, why did it take so long to begin? If intelligence and creativity were already present, why is the first visible civilization so recent? And if agriculture is the key that unlocked everything, why do we find monumental building projects that appear before farming should have existed? There is another problem hidden inside the timeline. We often imagine history as something permanent, something recorded and preserved. But most of human existence took place without writing and without durable materials. Wood rots, cloth disintegrates, mud walls collapse. Entire settlements can vanish beneath forests and rivers within a few centuries. If a civilization existed 10,000 years ago, its traces would already be faint. If a civilization existed 20,000 years ago, then its traces might be almost invisible. And if a civilization existed 50,000 years ago, then what would remain? Perhaps only the most durable materials, stone, fired clay, metal, and the reshaped landscapes of large-scale human activity. But even stone is vulnerable to time. Glaciers grind mountains into dust, floods reshape valleys, earthquakes bury cities, volcanoes coat entire regions in ash, sea levels rise and fall, swallowing coastlines and revealing them again, as if the planet itself is constantly rewriting its surface. The last ice age alone was a world-changing event. When it ended, sea levels rose by more than 100 meters. Entire coastal plains disappeared beneath the oceans. The land that once connected continents became water. Regions that were once fertile became deserts. The shape of the world shifted so dramatically that a map from 15,000 years ago would look like a different planet. And here is the quiet thought that often goes unspoken. If early civilizations existed, they would most likely have formed near water, near coastlines, near rivers, near fertile plains. Exactly the places now most likely to be flooded, eroded, buried, or transformed beyond recognition. In other words, if a forgotten chapter of civilization existed, the Earth itself has had thousands of years to hide it. The official story assumes that civilization began once, recently, and then steadily advanced. But the landscape of time suggests another possibility, that civilizations may have emerged earlier, reached heights we can barely imagine, and then been swept away by catastrophe or slow decline, leaving only scattered clues behind. The timeline feels too short, because perhaps we are looking at only the most recent layer. And beneath it, beneath the sand, beneath the sea, beneath the silent forests and the shifting ground, older layers may still wait. Tonight, we begin to search for them.
Long before the pyramids rose beside the Nile, before the first kings carved their names into stone, before writing preserved memory in lines of ink and clay, there were already cities. Not villages, not camps, cities. For most of modern history, this idea would have seemed impossible. Civilization, we were told, began with farming. Farming led to permanent settlements. Permanent settlements grew into towns. Towns became cities. And only then could humans gather in numbers large enough to build monuments. Yet scattered across the world are places that quietly refuse to follow this order. They sit in silence beneath open skies, their stones worn smooth by wind and rain, their foundations older than memory itself. One of these places lies on a quiet hill in southeastern Turkey, Göbekli Tepe. At first glance, it appears to be nothing more than a low rise of earth and broken rock, but beneath the surface lies one of the most astonishing discoveries of modern archaeology, a vast complex of massive stone circles, each formed by towering pillars carved with animals, symbols, and abstract patterns. These stones weigh up to 20 tons. They stand taller than a person. They were cut, shaped, transported, and erected with extraordinary precision, and they are more than 11,000 years old. According to the official timeline, this was a time when humans were still simple hunter-gatherers, moving through the landscape in small groups. They were not supposed to possess organized labor, long-term planning, or the social structures needed to coordinate such a monumental project. Yet Göbekli Tepe exists. It does not show signs of being a temporary camp. It is not a single structure. It is a carefully designed complex, built and rebuilt over generations. And perhaps most strangely of all, it appears to have been deliberately buried by its builders, as if they wished to preserve it for a future age. Not far away, along the Jordan River, stands another ancient settlement, Jericho. Its walls and towers date back nearly 10,000 years, making it one of the oldest continuously occupied cities on Earth. Its people built defensive structures long before the rise of kings and empires, suggesting a level of organization and social complexity that should not yet have existed. Further east, in central Anatolia, lies Çatalhöyük, a sprawling settlement of tightly packed houses built more than 9,000 years ago. Its inhabitants painted murals on their walls, crafted symbolic figurines, and buried their dead beneath the floors of their homes. It was a true city,
with rituals, trade, and shared identity. These were not isolated accidents. They were part of a pattern. Across the ancient world, the earliest traces of civilization appear not as slow evolution from small camps, but as fully formed urban cultures. They emerge almost suddenly, bringing with them architecture, art, religion, and social organization. It is as if humanity did not slowly learn how to build cities. It is as if someone remembered how. The deeper archaeologists dig, the more often they encounter this strange phenomenon, advanced settlements appearing far earlier than expected, with no clear ancestors and no simple path leading up to them. They rise from the earth like echoes of something older, and once you see them, it becomes impossible to ignore the question they leave behind. If these cities were not the first, then what came before them? What earlier knowledge shaped their design? What forgotten culture passed down the skills that allowed stone to be cut so cleanly, walls to be aligned so precisely, and entire landscapes to be reshaped with intention? Tonight, as we walk among these ancient stones, we begin to sense that history may not be a story of beginnings. It may be a story of remembrance. When we imagine the distant past, we often picture a world of simple lives and simple tools. Stone knives shaped by hand, wooden spears hardened in fire, rope twisted from plant fibers, shelters built from branches and animal hides, a life measured by the seasons, the hunt, and the rising and setting of the sun. It is a humble image. And yet, scattered across that same ancient world, there stand structures that seem to belong to a different reality entirely. Enormous stones, weighing tens or even hundreds of tons, lifted into place with a precision that still challenges modern engineers. Walls fitted so tightly that even a blade cannot pass between them. Platforms and terraces built on mountain peaks. Temples aligned with the movements of the sun, the moon, and the distant stars. In southern Peru, high in the Andes, lies the ancient city of Cusco. Its foundations are built from massive polygonal stones, each one cut to fit perfectly with the next. No mortar holds them together. Their weight alone locks them in place. Some of these stones weigh more than a modern truck. At Sacsayhuaman, above Cusco, 3 enormous walls curve across the hillside like frozen waves of stone. The largest blocks are taller than a person. Some weigh more than 100 tons, and yet they are arranged with astonishing precision, forming a fortress that has stood for centuries against earthquakes and time. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid rises from the desert, built from more than 2 million blocks of stone. Each block weighs several tons. The structure is aligned with true north to a precision that modern builders still struggle to achieve. Its internal chambers are arranged according to mathematical ratios that reveal a deep understanding of geometry. In Lebanon, at Baalbek, the foundations of a Roman temple rest upon 3 colossal stones known as the trilithon. Each weighs over 800 tons. They are among the largest stones ever moved by human hands. And yet, when these structures were built, there were no cranes, no steel cables, no engines, no wheels capable of bearing such weight, no written manuals explaining how to calculate stress, leverage, and load. Only human strength, only simple tools, only knowledge. The official explanation tells us that these monuments were built through immense labor. thousands of workers pulling on ropes, rolling stones on logs, levering blocks into place with wooden beams. And in some cases this may be true. But when we look closely at the scale, the precision, and the engineering involved, the picture becomes less clear. How were stones cut so cleanly without metal saws? How were blocks transported across mountains, rivers, and deserts? How were structures aligned so accurately without modern instruments? How were complex designs planned without written blueprints? The more we study these ancient sites, the more they resemble the work of master builders. Not beginners, not experimenters, but experts. It is as if the people who built these monuments were not discovering architecture for the first time. It is as if they were continuing a tradition that had already learned how to shape the earth itself. And so we return again to the quiet question that follows us through every ruin and every stone circle. Who taught them? Who came before? And what knowledge has been lost to time? Tonight, as the shadows of these ancient walls stretch across the land, we begin to feel that humanity's earliest architects may not have been standing at the dawn of civilization. They may have been standing at the twilight of something far older.
There was a time when much of the world lay hidden beneath vast sheets of ice. For tens of thousands of years, glaciers stretched across continents, covering mountains, plains, and valleys beneath layers of frozen silence. In the far north, ice rose higher than modern skyscrapers. In the south, frozen deserts reached toward the horizon. Sea levels were far lower than they are today, and coastlines extended far beyond their present edges. The world was colder, harsher, and yet strangely alive. Between the frozen regions lay wide belts of habitable land. Grasslands spread where oceans now roll. Forests grew where waves now break against distant shores. Great rivers carved paths through landscapes that no longer exist. This was the world of the last ice age, and it was a world that ended. Around 12,000 years ago, the climate began to change with startling speed. Temperatures rose, glaciers melted, ice retreated toward the poles. The seas began to rise, slowly at first, then faster and faster, swallowing the lowlands and reshaping the edges of every continent. Coastal plains vanished beneath the waves, river valleys flooded, entire regions were erased from the map of the world. What had once been dry land became seabed. What had once been home became ocean. For the people who lived through this transformation, the world must have seemed to dissolve beneath their feet. Familiar hunting grounds disappeared. Ancient routes were cut off. Camps and settlements were abandoned. The horizon itself moved. It was not a single event. It was a long, slow catastrophe. Generation after generation watched the waters creep higher. They retreated inland. They rebuilt. They adapted. And all the while, the memory of a lost world began to take shape in story and legend. A land that sank beneath the sea, a time when the earth was different, an age that ended in flood. Across cultures separated by oceans and continents, the same story appears again and again. In Mesopotamia, there is the tale of a great deluge that destroyed the world. In India, ancient texts speak of a flood that wiped away an earlier age.
In Greece, the story of Deucalion tells of a time when only a few survived rising waters. In the Americas, indigenous traditions remember a world before the flood. In the Pacific, island cultures speak of sunken lands and lost homelands beneath the waves. These stories are not identical, but their echoes are unmistakable. They remember a time when the sea rose and took the land. And here is the quiet thought that lingers beneath these ancient memories. If a civilization had existed before the end of the Ice Age, it would have lived in a world that no longer exists. Its cities would now lie beneath the oceans, its roads would be buried under layers of sediment, its fields would be part of the seabed, its harbors would be coral reefs. We search for ancient civilizations on the land we see today, but perhaps the oldest cities lie where we rarely look, beneath the waves. Modern sonar scans and underwater exploration have already revealed stone structures, walls, and geometric formations on the ocean floor. Off the coasts of Japan, India, and the Mediterranean, researchers have found traces of what appeared to be submerged settlements. They sit in silence, far below the reach of sunlight, waiting for a future age to rediscover them. If there was a lost civilization of the Ice Age, it would not be found in deserts or jungles. It would be found beneath the sea. And the deeper we dive into the drowned landscapes of the past, the more we begin to sense that humanity's story may not have begun on dry land at all. It may have begun on a shoreline that no longer exists.
The flood that changed everything. When the ice began to melt, the world did not simply grow warmer, it transformed. Rivers swelled with glacial runoff, lakes expanded beyond their ancient shores, seas rose higher each century, claiming valleys, forests, and plains that had existed since the dawn of human memory. What had once been familiar terrain slowly became a shifting, uncertain landscape. For people who lived in this age, the change must have felt endless, a shoreline that moved a little farther inland every year, a river that no longer followed the path it once knew, a valley that filled with water and became a lake, a homeland that disappeared beneath the waves. This was not a single catastrophic moment. It was a long farewell to an old world. And yet, in the stories passed down through generations, this gradual transformation was remembered as a single, overwhelming event. A flood that swallowed the earth. Across ancient cultures, the memory remains. In Mesopotamia, one of the oldest stories ever written tells of a great deluge sent to cleanse the world. A man is warned, a vessel is built, life is saved from rising waters. In the Hebrew tradition, the story of Noah describes a world drowned beneath endless rain. In India, the god Vishnu warns Manu of a coming flood that will destroy all life. In Greece, Deucalion survives a world-ending flood sent by the gods. In China, legends speak of a great inundation that reshaped the land and forced humanity to rebuild. In the Americas, indigenous nations tell of a time when water covered the world and only a few survived on high ground.
These stories are separated by oceans, languages, and millennia, and yet they share the same bones. A world before the flood, a warning, a vessel or refuge, a chosen survivor, a new beginning. For a long time, these tales were treated as myth, symbolic stories meant to explain the power of nature and the fragility of life. But today, geology tells a story that is no less dramatic. At the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose by more than 100 meters. Entire continental shelves were submerged. Some regions flooded so quickly that ancient coastlines vanished within a human lifetime. In one of the most striking examples, the Black Sea was once a freshwater lake. When the Mediterranean rose high enough, seawater broke through a natural barrier and poured into the basin, flooding vast areas of land and creating the sea we know today. To the people living along its shores, it would have felt like the end of the world. Walls of water, vanishing fields, drowned villages, the sudden arrival of salt where fresh water had always been. It is not difficult to imagine how such events could be remembered as divine punishment or cosmic judgment. When the earth itself turns against the land, the only language large enough to describe it is myth. And so, in the quiet space between geology and legend, a possibility begins to form. If there was a civilization that flourished before the end of the Ice Age, then its downfall would have been written into the very fabric of the planet. Its cities would have drowned, its fields would have turned to seabed, its roads would have become coral and sand. Its people would have carried the memory with them as they fled inland. They would have told their children, and their children would have told theirs, until, thousands of years later, the flood became a story, and the story became scripture, and scripture became legend. Tonight, as the modern world sleeps beneath calm skies, we listen to these ancient echoes and wonder. Are these merely myths? Or are they memories of a world that once stood where the oceans now lie?
When the seas rose. There was a time when the shape of the earth was different, where waves now roll across endless horizons. There were once wide plains covered in grass and forests, where coral reefs now glow beneath clear water. There were once riverbanks and settlements, where fishing boats now drift above deep blue depths. There were once footpaths worn smooth by generations of travelers. The oceans we know today are young. For most of human existence, sea levels were far lower. Vast stretches of land connected continents. Great river systems flowed across plains that are now submerged. Coastlines extended hundreds of kilometers farther than they do now. This was the world in which early humans lived, and it was a world that vanished. As the ice sheets melted, the seas did not rise gently. They advanced steadily, sometimes slowly, sometimes in great surges that transformed coastlines within a few generations. Entire regions disappeared beneath the water. Maps had to be redrawn. Paths were lost. Familiar landmarks sank into memory. To us, this change is measured in geological data and satellite images. To them, it was the loss of everything they knew.
Imagine standing on a shore where your ancestors had lived for thousands of years. Imagine watching the tide creep higher each season. Imagine retreating again and again until there is nowhere left to go. Imagine knowing that the land of your grandparents is now beneath the waves. Across the world, underwater archaeology is slowly revealing what was left behind. Off the coast of India, near the Gulf of Cambay, sonar scans have detected vast structures resting on the ocean floor. Long, straight lines, right angles, geometric formations that resemble city blocks. Some of these structures may be more than 9,000 years old. Near the island of Yonaguni in Japan, massive stone terraces descend into the sea. Staircases, platforms, and walls carved directly into bedrock. Their shapes are so precise that many believe they were shaped by human hands long before rising waters claimed the site. In the Mediterranean, off the coast of Greece, submerged ruins lie where coastal towns once stood. In the North Sea, beneath the waves between Britain and mainland Europe, lies Doggerland, a vast lost landmass that once connected two continents. It was home to forests, rivers, animals, and human communities. Today, it is a silent seabed. These drowned landscapes were not empty wilderness. They were lived-in worlds. They had paths and camps, fields and fishing grounds, meeting places and sacred sites. They were part of a living human geography that stretched far beyond what we see on modern maps. If early civilizations existed, they would have thrived in these fertile coastal regions. They would have built their cities near rivers and shores. They would have traded by boat. They would have watched the tides and tracked the seasons. And when the seas rose, their world would have been erased, not destroyed in a single day, but slowly and relentlessly, until the water covered the last stones and the last memories. What remains now are fragments, a wall here, a platform there, a pattern on the seabed that should not be natural. Enough to suggest that human history did not always belong only to the land we see today. It belonged to coastlines that no longer exist. Tonight, as we imagine the ancient shorelines beneath the moonlight, we begin to see the oceans not just as barriers between continents, but as vast archives. They hold the memory of lost worlds, and they may still be hiding the first cities of humanity.
In quiet archives and dimly lit libraries, there are maps that do not belong to their time. They are drawn on fragile parchment, inked by hands that lived centuries ago, yet they seem to depict a world far older than any known civilization. Their coastlines curve in unfamiliar ways. Their continents stretch where oceans now lie. Their details suggest knowledge that should not have existed when they were created. These maps whisper of a forgotten geography. One of the most famous was drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis. At first glance, it appears to be a typical Renaissance-era chart of the known world, but when scholars studied it more closely, they noticed something strange. The map shows the coast of South America with remarkable accuracy. It shows the outline of Africa. It shows islands in the Atlantic. And at its southern edge, it appears to show a landmass that closely resembles Antarctica. Not the Antarctica we know today, but Antarctica without ice.
The coastline on the map matches the shape of the continent as it would appear if its massive ice sheets were removed. Geological surveys have since confirmed that beneath kilometers of ice, Antarctica does indeed have rivers, mountains, and valleys that follow the same contours drawn on the map. The problem is not what the map shows. The problem is when. Antarctica has been covered in ice for at least 6,000 years. No human civilization with ships and navigation tools is known to have existed when its shores were free of ice. And yet the map appears to preserve a memory of a world that predates recorded history. Piri Reis himself wrote that his chart was compiled from much older sources, maps inherited from unknown civilizations, documents copied and recopied across generations, fragments of a much older cartographic tradition. Other maps tell similar stories. The Oronteus Phineus map of 1531 shows Antarctica in detail, complete with mountain ranges and river systems. The Mercator map of 1569 includes land masses that resemble submerged coastlines. Portolan charts of the medieval world show precise shorelines long before accurate longitude measurement was possible. To create such maps, one would need advanced navigation, astronomy, and mathematics. One would need knowledge of the size and shape of the Earth. One would need instruments capable of measuring latitude and longitude with great precision, and one would need ships capable of crossing vast oceans. In other words, one would need a global civilization. The official story tells us that such capabilities emerged only in the last few centuries, that before the age of exploration, the world was largely unknown and unmapped. But these maps suggest a deeper memory, a memory of coastlines that no longer exist, a memory of continents before the ice, a memory of a world that has been reshaped by time. Perhaps these charts are not inventions. Perhaps they are echoes. If a civilization existed before the end of the Ice Age, one that sailed the oceans and mapped the earth, then its knowledge may have survived long after its cities were lost, passed down in fragments, preserved in copies, hidden in archives. And centuries later, when Renaissance scholars searched for ancient wisdom, they may have unknowingly uncovered the last traces of a forgotten global culture. Tonight, as we follow the lines of these mysterious maps, we begin to see that the past may not be as small as we once believed. The world may have been known long before it was rediscovered, and the oceans may have carried travelers across a planet that looked very different from the one we inhabit today.
There is a place on earth where the land itself seems to remember another time. A place where dunes roll like frozen waves across an endless horizon. Where the wind draws shifting patterns on the surface of the desert. Where the sun rises and sets over a landscape that appears empty, silent, and timeless. The Sahara. Today, it is the largest hot desert in the world, a vast expanse of sand and stone stretching across North Africa. A land of heat, dryness, and long, lonely distances. But it was not always so. There was a time when the Sahara was green. Lakes filled its basins, rivers crossed its plains, grasslands stretched beneath open skies,
Forests shaded valleys where animals gathered and people built their homes. Rock paintings hidden among its cliffs and canyons show scenes of a world that no longer exists. Giraffes walking across open plains, crocodiles swimming in wide rivers, cattle grazing beneath trees, boats gliding across lakes where now there is only dust. These images are not imagination, they are memory. They tell of a time when the Sahara was one of the most fertile regions on Earth, and when people lived there in great numbers. As the climate shifted, the monsoon rains that once fed the Sahara slowly retreated south. Year by year, century by century, the lakes shrank, the rivers dried, grasslands turned to scrub, forests faded into sand. The desert was born. But the people who lived there did not vanish overnight. They adapted, they moved, they followed the water. And in doing so, they carried with them the knowledge of a green world that would one day be forgotten. Beneath the sands of the Sahara, satellites have revealed strange patterns, long lines, circular shapes, rectangular formations, structures that do not belong to nature. In some regions, ancient river systems have been mapped beneath the dunes, tracing the ghostly paths of waterways that once fed thriving settlements. Archaeologists have uncovered stone tools, pottery, and burial sites in places that are now among the driest on Earth. These were not temporary camps. They were parts of a living landscape. And deeper still, beneath layers of sediment, there may lie cities that were abandoned when the rains failed and the land began to die. If a civilization existed before the great desert formed, it would now be hidden beneath kilometers of sand, its roads buried, its walls erased, its temples reduced to shapes that only satellites can see. The Sahara is not empty. It is a graveyard of worlds, a place where the memory of rivers and lakes is written into stone, a place where ancient coastlines still echo in dry valleys, a place where human history stretches far beyond what the surface reveals. Tonight, as we imagine the wind moving across these dunes, we can almost hear the sound of water that once flowed here. We can almost see the reflection of stars in lakes that no longer exist. And we begin to understand that deserts are not the end of history. They are its concealment. Beneath the sand, the past is waiting. Across the continents, there are stones that seem to speak the same language. They stand on wind-swept plains and mist-covered hills. They rise from jungles and deserts. They crown mountain ridges and guard river valleys. They appear in places separated by oceans and thousands of kilometers, yet they share the same quiet presence. Megaliths, great stones. Some stand alone, others form circles, lines, and vast complexes. Some are rough and weathered, others are carved with symbols and shaped with deliberate precision. Together, they form a global pattern that stretches far beyond any single culture or era. In southern England, on an open plain beneath wide skies, stands Stonehenge. Massive stones arranged in a perfect circle, aligned with the rising and setting of the sun. For thousands of years, people have gathered there to mark the turning of the seasons. Its builders left no written record, yet they shaped one of the most iconic monuments on Earth. In France, the Karnak stones stretch across the landscape in long, silent rows. More than 3,000 standing stones, arranged with care and intention, forming a geometry that can only be seen from above. Their purpose is still debated, but their scale suggests a project that required generations to complete. In Egypt, the pyramids rise from the desert like mountains made by human hands. Their alignment with the stars, their internal chambers, their precise geometry, all speak of a culture that understood the heavens as deeply as it understood the earth. In Peru and Bolivia, at sites such as Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, enormous stone blocks lie scattered like pieces of a fallen machine. Each block is cut with grooves, angles, and sockets so precise that they fit together like components of a single design. Some are shaped as if meant to interlock with others in a structure that no longer stands. In Lebanon, the temple platform of Baalbek rests on stones so large that even modern cranes would struggle to lift them. They form a foundation of impossible scale, as if built for a civilization that expected its monuments to last forever. In Japan, underwater near Yonaguni, stone terraces descend into the sea in perfect steps, their edges sharp, their lines straight. Whether shaped by nature or by human hands, they echo the geometry found in megalithic sites across the world. From Easter Island to Malta, from Ireland to Indonesia, the same pattern repeats. Large stones, sacred geometry, astronomical alignment, monumental scale, and always the same mystery. How did cultures separated by oceans and millennia arrive at such similar traditions? There is no evidence of a single empire that ruled the entire world in ancient times, no known global kingdom that spread its architecture to every corner of the earth, and yet the stones themselves suggest a shared heritage, a shared memory. Perhaps these monuments are not the beginning of architecture. Perhaps they are the continuation of something older. If an advanced civilization existed before the end of the Ice Age, its survivors may have scattered across the world, carrying fragments of knowledge, carrying sacred traditions, carrying the memory of how to shape stone and align structures with the sky. Over generations, these traditions could have taken root in distant lands. They could have evolved into local styles. They could have become the foundations of new cultures. But beneath their differences, they would still speak the same ancient language, the language of stone. Tonight, as we imagine these monuments standing beneath moonlight and starlight, we begin to see them not as isolated wonders, but as nodes in a vast forgotten network, a network that once connected the world, and whose echoes still stand, waiting to be remembered.
The engineers of the impossible. When modern engineers stand before the greatest monuments of the ancient world, they often do so in quiet disbelief. Not because the structures are beautiful, not because they are old, but because even with today's machines, recreating them would be difficult. Cranes would be required, steel frameworks, computer modeling, precision instruments, teams of specialists, months or years of planning. And yet, these monuments were built in a time when none of these things existed, or at least none that we know of.
At the Great Pyramid of Giza, each stone block weighs several tons, some weigh far more. They were quarried miles away, transported across desert terrain, lifted dozens of meters into the air, and placed with astonishing accuracy. The pyramid's base is level to within a fraction of an inch across its entire length. Its sides are aligned with the cardinal directions more precisely than many modern buildings. Inside, narrow passages lead to chambers positioned according to mathematical principles that reveal an advanced understanding of geometry. The proportions of the pyramid reflect constants that would not be formally described for thousands of years. In Peru, at Ollantaytambo, massive stone blocks sit atop a steep mountainside. They were quarried from a distant mountain across a river valley. To reach their current position, they had to be hauled uphill, across rough terrain, and placed with careful alignment. At Pumapunku, stone blocks are carved with such precision that they appear to have been machined. Perfect right angles, smooth, flat surfaces, grooves and slots that suggest modular construction. The stones look less like primitive masonry and more like components of a lost machine. In Egypt, at the Serapeum of Saqqara, enormous granite sarcophagi sit inside underground chambers. Each weighs over 100 tons. Their interiors are carved to near perfect smoothness, with corners so precise they seem to defy the tools that were supposedly available. Granite is harder than iron. To cut it cleanly requires advanced abrasives, powerful saws, and long hours of controlled machining. Yet these objects exist. They were made, and they have endured. The official explanations often speak of vast labor forces, of clever use of levers and ramps, of generations of workers moving stones inch by inch. But these explanations do not fully account for the level of precision. They do not explain the fine tolerances. They do not explain the consistency across sites. They do not explain how similar techniques appear on opposite sides of the planet. When we look closely, we begin to see that ancient builders were not simply stacking stones. They were engineering. They understood load distribution. They understood seismic stability. They understood material properties. They understood geometry and measurement. They built for eternity. And this raises a quiet but profound question. Where did this knowledge come from? Civilizations do not usually begin with perfection. They experiment. They make mistakes. They build rough versions before achieving mastery. But the earliest monumental architecture we find is already refined, already advanced, already confident. It is as if the builders of the ancient world were inheritors, not pioneers. They were continuing a craft that had already been perfected long before, a craft whose origins lie beyond the reach of written history. Tonight, as we imagine these massive stones resting beneath the stars, we begin to feel that humanity's first engineers may not have been standing at the dawn of civilization. They may have been standing at the end of a forgotten age, and the monuments they left behind may be the last visible trace of a world that once mastered the art of shaping the earth itself.
Across the ancient world, there are traces of understanding that seem far too refined for their time. Not fragments of trial and error, not the rough beginnings of learning, but knowledge that appears fully formed. Knowledge of the sky, knowledge of number, knowledge of shape and proportion, knowledge of cycles that unfold over thousands of years. In the ruins of long-lost civilizations, stone and clay preserve a memory of minds that once looked deeply into the structure of reality itself. In Mesopotamia, the earliest astronomers tracked the movements of the planets with extraordinary precision. They mapped the paths of Jupiter and Saturn across the heavens. They recorded eclipses. They calculated calendars that aligned with the rhythms of the sun and moon. Their tablets reveal a mathematical system based on 60, a system still used today to measure time and angles. In Egypt, the builders of temples aligned their monuments with solstices, equinoxes, and the rising of specific stars. The Great Pyramid itself appears to encode astronomical knowledge in its dimensions. Its layout reflects the geometry of Earth. Its internal passages mirror the paths of celestial bodies. Its placement corresponds to the stars of Orion's belt, as if the structure were meant to mirror the heavens on the ground. In Central America, the Maya developed one of the most precise calendars ever created. They calculated the length of the solar year to a degree of accuracy that rivals modern measurements. They tracked the cycles of Venus with astonishing precision. Their understanding of time stretched far into the future and deep into the past. In India, ancient texts describe vast cosmic cycles spanning millions of years. They speak of ages of creation and destruction, of worlds that rise and fall in endless rhythm. These concepts mirror modern theories of cosmic expansion and contraction, as if ancient thinkers had already glimpsed the true scale of time. Even in places where writing did not survive, knowledge was preserved in stone. Stone circles mark the turning of the seasons. Temples face the rising sun on sacred days. Pyramids align with constellations. Monuments track the long arc of the moon across the sky. This is not the work of simple farmers marking the weather. It is the work of careful observers, patient recorders, thinkers who studied the heavens across generations. To build such systems requires more than curiosity. It requires continuity. It requires institutions. It requires a culture that values knowledge and preserves it across centuries. And yet, when we search for the origins of this wisdom, we find no clear beginning. The earliest written records already contain advanced mathematics. The earliest temples already align with celestial cycles. The earliest cities already follow sacred geometries. It is as if humanity did not slowly discover these truths. It is as if it remembered them. Perhaps this knowledge is the inheritance of a lost age. Perhaps it was once part of a global tradition, passed down through schools, temples, and centers of learning that no longer exist. When that civilization fell, its libraries would have burned, its teachers would have vanished, its institutions would have collapsed. But fragments of its understanding may have survived, carried by survivors, preserved in ritual, encoded in myth, written into stone. Over time, these fragments would become sacred traditions, mysteries known only to priests, secrets whispered between initiates, symbols whose meanings faded but whose forms remained. The ancient world may not have been discovering knowledge, it may have been guarding it. Tonight, as we imagine scholars watching the stars from temple rooftops and tracing numbers into clay, we begin to feel that the true origins of human understanding may lie far beyond the horizon of recorded history, and that the wisdom of the ancients may not be a beginning, but an echo. Before history was written, it was spoken. Before memory was carved into stone, it lived in stories asked from one generation to the next, around fires beneath open skies, in temples lit by oil lamps, in long nights when the world was quiet and the stars felt close. These stories did not speak only of kings and wars. They spoke of ages, of worlds before our own, of civilizations that lived in harmony with the earth and the sky until a great change came and swept them away. Across continents and cultures, the same vision appears again and again, a lost golden age. In Greek tradition, philosophers wrote of Atlantis, a vast island empire beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a civilization of great cities, advanced knowledge, and powerful fleets. Its people were said to be wealthy, skilled, and wise. But as their society grew corrupt, the earth itself turned against them. In a single day and night, Atlantis vanished beneath the sea. In India, ancient texts speak of past ages known as yugas, immense cycles of time in which humanity rises to great heights and then falls into darkness. Each age ends in catastrophe, followed by renewal. In Egypt, priests told of a time when the gods ruled on earth, when knowledge flowed freely and civilization flourished under divine guidance. This age, too, came to an end, replaced by the imperfect world of humans. In Central America, legends tell of previous worlds destroyed by fire, flood, and wind. Each world gave rise to a new humanity, shaped by the lessons of the one before. In the Pacific, stories speak of sunken lands, entire continents swallowed by the ocean, remembered only in chants and carvings. These legends were once dismissed as imagination, as poetry, as metaphor. But when placed beside the evidence left in stone and sea, they take on a different tone. They sound like memory. A memory stretched across thousands of years. A memory reshaped by language and culture. A memory that survived when everything else was lost. If a great civilization existed before the end of the Ice Age, its fall would have been so complete that only its shadow would remain. Its cities would be gone, its machines would be dust, its metals would be reclaimed by the earth. But its story might endure, not as history, but as myth. The word myth does not mean false, it means ancient. It means sacred. It means a story that carries truth in symbolic form. When Plato wrote of Atlantis, he claimed he was repeating a story told to him by Egyptian priests, a story preserved in temple records that described a world destroyed long before the first dynasties of Egypt. If such records once existed, they would have been lost in fires, floods, and the slow decay of time. But the story survived, and so did many others like it. A land that sank beneath the waves, a world before the flood, an age of giants, a time when humans walked beside gods. Perhaps these legends are not fantasies. Perhaps they are the last fragments of a history too old to be remembered in any other way. Tonight, as we listen to these ancient voices carried across millennia, we begin to feel that the past may not be silent at all. It is whispering, and it is asking us to remember a world that existed before the one we know.
There are moments in the history of the Earth when everything changes. Not slowly, not gently, but in a sudden, overwhelming instant that redraws the map of the world. These moments leave scars in stone and ice. They reshape coastlines. They alter climates. They rewrite the course of life itself. And they often arrive from the sky. Across the surface of the planet, scientists have discovered layers of sediment filled with tiny fragments of melted rock and metal. These layers mark the impact of objects that once traveled through space, blazing across the atmosphere before striking the Earth with unimaginable force. Craters stretch across deserts and oceans. Some are small, hidden beneath forests and fields. Others are vast, spanning hundreds of kilometers, their edges worn smooth by time. Each one is a reminder that the Earth is not alone in the cosmos. It moves through a crowded universe, and sometimes the universe reaches back. Around 12,000 years ago, at the very end of the last ice age, the planet experienced a dramatic and sudden shift. Temperatures plunged, glaciers briefly returned, fires swept across continents, large animals vanished from the landscape. This event is known as the Younger Dryas. For centuries, its cause remained a mystery. Then, in layers of ancient soil, researchers found traces of impact debris, microscopic diamonds, magnetic spherules, and signs of intense heat. Evidence that a fragmented comet or asteroid may have struck the Earth. Not once, but many times. If such an event occurred, it would have been witnessed by the people of that age. They would have seen fire streak across the sky. They would have felt the ground shake. They would have watched forests burn and waters rise. To them, it would have looked like the end of the world. A sky that rained fire, a sun hidden behind ash, a cold that returned without warning, a land that could no longer feed its people. Civilizations built along coasts and rivers would have been the first to fall. Floods would have swept away lowlands. Tsunamis would have erased shorelines. Earthquakes would have shattered cities. And in the chaos that followed, the survivors would have fled to higher ground, carrying little more than memory. Across ancient traditions, we find echoes of this catastrophe. Stories of a burning sky, of a sun that stood still, of a world consumed by fire, of a night that lasted for years. These are not gentle myths. They are disaster memories. If a great civilization existed before this cosmic event, it may have been wiped away in a single generation. Its cities reduced to rubble, its fields turned to ash, its people scattered across a broken world. What followed would not have been a continuation, it would have been a beginning. A long, slow rebuilding from the ruins of a forgotten age. The world we know may be the product of survival, not progress. Tonight, as we imagine the ancient sky blazing with fire and the earth trembling beneath falling stars, we begin to see how fragile civilization truly is, and how easily even the greatest world can vanish. All it takes is a moment, a flash, a shadow crossing the sun, and the day the sky fell. The Great Reset. After the fires faded and the waters settled, the world would not have returned to what it once was. The old coastlines were gone. The old rivers had changed their paths. The forests were broken. The plains were flooded. Where cities may once have stood, there was now silence. If a great civilization had existed before the end of the Ice Age, it would have faced a world that no longer supported it. Trade routes would have vanished beneath the sea, harbors would have become reefs, roads would have led nowhere, Fields that once fed thousands would have turned into marshes or desert. The complex systems that sustain civilization are fragile. They depend on stability, on predictable seasons, on fertile land, on safe passage between regions. When the climate shifts and the geography changes, these systems collapse. What remains is survival. Small groups gathering what they can, families moving inland, communities rebuilding with whatever materials are left. Knowledge that once filled libraries reduced to memory. Techniques once taught in schools reduced to fragments passed from elder to child. A civilization does not fall only when its buildings crumble. It falls when its knowledge is broken, when its institutions vanish, when its teachers are lost, when its language fades, when its maps no longer match the land. In such a world, even the most advanced culture would be forced to begin again, not from nothing, but from memory, from stories, from half-remembered techniques, from traditions whose original meanings are slowly forgotten. The survivors of a lost age would not rebuild cities overnight. They would first build shelters, then villages, then small towns, and only after many generations would large societies begin to emerge again. In this long, slow recovery, much would be lost. Engineering would become legend, astronomy would become myth, navigation would become ritual, mathematics would become sacred geometry. The tools that once shaped stone would rust away. The machines that once lifted great blocks would fall silent. The roads that once connected continents would disappear beneath forests and sand. What remained would be only the most durable traces. Monuments too large to destroy, stones too heavy to move, structures too deeply rooted to erase. These would become the sacred places of the new world. Temples built atop ancient platforms, cities founded on forgotten foundations, stories told around ruins whose original purpose was no longer known. To the people of the next age, these remnants would seem to belong to gods or giants. Their builders would be imagined as divine or mythical beings. Their achievements would feel impossible. And so, slowly, the memory of a real civilization would transform into legend. A golden age, a lost world, a time when humans lived closer to the gods. What followed would be what we call history. The Egypt along the Nile, the birth of Sumer in Mesopotamia, the growth of cities in the Indus Valley, the emergence of early dynasties in China. These were not the first civilizations. They were the first after the Great Forgetting, the first to rise from the long night that followed the end of an earlier world. The world we know may be the second act, or the third, or the fourth. Tonight, as we imagine the survivors of a lost age watching the sun rise over a changed earth, we begin to see our own civilization differently, not as the first, but as the latest.
Survivors. When the old world ended, it did not vanish in a single breath. It faded, it fractured, it broke into pieces scattered across a wounded earth. Some cities may have drowned beneath rising seas, some may have burned in firestorms, some may have collapsed beneath earthquakes, some may have been abandoned when rivers dried and forests died. But not everyone would have perished. There are always survivors. They flee before the final wave. They climb to higher ground. They follow retreating rivers inland. They seek shelter in mountains and valleys. They carry with them what they can: tools, seeds,
animals, stories, and knowledge. If a great civilization once existed, its end would not have meant the end of its people. It would have meant dispersion, a scattering of small groups across a transformed world. These survivors would no longer live in shining cities. They would no longer sail great fleets across drowned oceans. They would no longer study the heavens from grand observatories. They would live simply. They would hunt again. They would gather again. They would build with wood and stone. They would measure time by the seasons. And yet, within their communities, fragments of an older wisdom would remain, a way of shaping stone passed from father to son, a way of reading the stars taught by elders, a memory of coastlines that no longer exist, a story of a world that once stood where the ocean now lies. To their children, these would not be lessons, they would be legends. The survivors would speak of tall cities and great harbors, of towers that touched the sky, of ships that crossed endless waters, of machines that moved stones as if they were weightless. Their listeners would not fully believe them. How could such a world have existed? Where were its ruins? Where were its roads? Where were its cities? But the ruins would lie beneath the sea, the roads would be buried under forests, the cities would be dust beneath sand. All that would remain would be memory, and memory over generations becomes myth. Yet sometimes in the quiet corners of the world, knowledge survives. In isolated mountain valleys, on distant islands, among desert tribes, within priesthoods and secret orders. There are traditions that claim to preserve ancient wisdom, teachings passed down not through books, but through initiation, through ritual, through long years of study. Sacred geometry, star lore, navigation by the heavens, healing arts, architectural canons. These traditions often claim origins far older than the cultures that now practice them. They speak of teachers who came from the sea, of wise beings who arrived after the flood, of ancestors who remembered a time before the world was broken. Perhaps these stories are not metaphor, perhaps they are history filtered through time. The survivors of a lost civilization would not rebuild their old world. They would not have the numbers, the resources, or the stability, but they could plant seeds, seeds of knowledge, seeds of culture, seeds of remembrance. Over thousands of years, these seeds would grow into new civilizations: Egypt, Sumer, Indus, China, the Americas. Each would carry fragments of a much older inheritance. Each would stand upon the shoulders of a forgotten age. Tonight, as we imagine small groups moving across a changing earth, guided only by memory and hope, we begin to feel the weight of what may have been lost and the quiet resilience of what survived.
The Teachers of the Ancients. In the earliest traditions of many civilizations, there is a strange and recurring theme. The first teachers did not come from among the people. They arrived. They appeared after a great disaster. They emerged from the sea or descended from the sky. They carried knowledge that transformed scattered tribes into organized societies. They taught humans how to build, how to farm, how to write, how to measure time, how to read the heavens. And when their work was done, they disappeared. In Mesopotamia, the ancient Sumerians told of the Apkallu, wise beings who came before the flood. They were said to possess vast knowledge and to have instructed humanity in the arts of civilization. After the Great Deluge, their descendants continued their work, guiding kings and priests. In Egypt, the earliest records speak of a time when the gods ruled on earth, a golden age when divine kings governed the land and established the foundations of Egyptian culture. The god Thoth was said to have given writing, mathematics, and astronomy to humanity. In Central America, the Maya and the Aztecs told of Quetzalcoatl, a radiant teacher who came from the east after a great destruction. He taught agriculture, architecture, medicine, and law. When his work was complete, he sailed away across the sea, promising one day to return. In South America, the Inca remembered Viracocha, a bearded figure who emerged from Lake Titicaca after a world-ending catastrophe. He walked across the Andes, teaching people how to live in harmony and order, before disappearing into the ocean. In Polynesia, legends speak of navigators who crossed vast oceans guided only by stars, winds, and waves. They carried with them ancient knowledge of astronomy and geography that allowed them to settle the most remote islands on Earth. In every culture, the story is the same. A time of chaos, a broken world, the arrival of teachers, the birth of civilization. These figures are often described as gods. But what if they were not divine? What if a last heir of a lost world existed? If a great civilization had existed before the flood, its survivors would have possessed knowledge far beyond that of the scattered tribes who remained. To those tribes, the survivors would have seemed like beings from another realm. They would have known how to shape stone. They would have known how to track the stars. They would have known how to organize society. They would have known how to plan cities and manage water. Their presence would have marked a new age. Over time, their memory would have grown larger than life. Their names would have become titles. Their deeds would have become sacred law. History would remember them as gods. And so, at the dawn of recorded civilization, we find not a slow emergence of knowledge, but a sudden arrival of wisdom. Writing appears fully formed. Calendars appear already precise. Architecture appears already advanced. Religion appears already complex. It is as if the first civilizations were not discovering these things, they were inheriting them. Perhaps the teachers of the ancients were not visitors from the heavens. Perhaps they were messengers from a forgotten earth. Survivors of a world that no longer exists. Tonight, as we imagine these figures walking across ruined landscapes, guiding humanity through the long recovery after catastrophe, we begin to see civilization not as a beginning, but a continuation, a second sunrise after a long, dark night. Ancient lost civilization, massive stone temples, soft golden light, mist in the air, calm atmosphere, cinematic illustration, epic scale, ultra-detailed, history documentary style. The first kings.
When order returned to the world, it did not arrive all at once. It rose slowly, like the sun after a long night. Small communities grew into towns, towns gathered behind walls, trade routes formed along rivers and coastlines, fields spread across fertile plains, and from these centers of life, the first kingdoms emerged. But the earliest kings did not rule as ordinary men. They ruled as heirs of a sacred past. In Sumer, the oldest civilization known to history, the first kings were said to have received their authority from the gods. The Sumerian king list describes rulers who lived for thousands of years before the Great Flood, followed by dynasties that ruled after the waters receded. The list reads less like a record of politics and more like a bridge between myth and memory. In Egypt, the first pharaohs were believed to be divine. They were not merely leaders, but living embodiments of cosmic order. Their duty was to maintain harmony between heaven and earth. Their bloodline was said to descend from the gods themselves. In China, the earliest emperors ruled under the mandate of heaven. Their legitimacy came not from force, but from a divine right rooted in cosmic balance. In the Andes, Inca rulers were said to be children of the sun. Their ancestors were believed to have emerged from sacred caves after a great destruction, guided by a heavenly father. Across the world, the first kings did not simply govern, they guarded something. They guarded knowledge. Their palaces were not just homes, but centers of learning. Their temples were not only places of worship, but archives of ancient wisdom. Their priests were astronomers, mathematicians, engineers, and healers. The earliest states were not built only on power, they were built on memory. These rulers inherited traditions older than their nations. They preserved rituals that had been practiced long before their cities existed. They aligned their capitals with the stars. They built their temples on ancient foundations. It is as if the first kings were not founding new worlds. They were restoring fragments of an older one. In many cultures, the earliest dynasties are described as living closer to the gods. Their reigns are remembered as golden ages of harmony and abundance. Over time, later kings are said to have fallen into corruption, pride, and greed. The pattern is always the same: a divine beginning, a sacred inheritance, a slow decline. This is the structure of myth, but it is also the structure of memory. If the survivors of a lost civilization helped rebuild the world, their descendants would naturally hold special status. They would be the keepers of ancient knowledge, the guardians of forgotten arts, the heirs of a time before the Great Destruction. Over generations, their origin would be mythologized. Their ancestors would become gods. Their cities would become sacred. Their laws would become eternal. History would remember them not as survivors, but as chosen rulers. Tonight, as we imagine the first king standing beneath the stars, wearing crowns that symbolized not only power, but remembrance, we begin to feel how deep the roots of civilization truly go, not into the soil of a single land, but into the shadow of a world that came before.
After the long recovery, after generations of survival and wandering, the world began to take on a new shape. Rivers once again became lifelines. Valleys filled with crops. Cities rose beside flowing water. Trade returned to the seas. And slowly, quietly, civilization was born again. Along the banks of the Nile, people gathered where the annual flood left behind rich black soil. They learned to read the rhythm of the river,
to plant and harvest in harmony with its cycle. Villages became towns, towns became cities, and cities gathered beneath the authority of a single crown. Egypt emerged. Its temples rose from the desert like mountains of stone. Its pyramids aligned with the stars. Its priests measured time by the movements of the heavens. Its architects built monuments meant to last for eternity. To later generations, Egypt would seem like the beginning of civilization. But to its own priests, Egypt was a restoration. They spoke of a time before dynasties, a time when the gods ruled directly on earth, a time when knowledge flowed freely and the land was guided by higher wisdom. Along the rivers of Mesopotamia, another world was taking shape. Between the Tigris and Euphrates, farmers built canals that tamed the floodwaters. Cities rose from the plains. Ziggurats towered over marketplaces and temples. Writing appeared on clay tablets. Laws were carved into stone. Sumer was born. Its scribes recorded the movements of the stars. Its mathematicians measured the earth. Its kings ruled by divine authority. Its myths spoke of a world before the flood, when great cities already stood and wise beings walked among humans. To modern historians, Sumer is the cradle of civilization, but to the Sumerians, it was the rebirth of a broken world. In the Indus Valley, cities were built with straight streets and advanced drainage systems. In China, early dynasties shaped a culture that would endure for thousands of years. In the Americas, civilizations rose in jungles and highlands, guided by calendars and celestial cycles. Across the planet, the same pattern repeated. Civilization returned, not as a fragile experiment, but as a confident design. Cities appeared already organized. Governments formed already complex. Religions emerged already structured. Sciences developed already refined. It is as if humanity remembered how to build a world. The first civilizations did not stumble into greatness. They stepped into it. Perhaps the knowledge carried by survivors had finally taken root. Perhaps the memory of a lost age had been transformed into new traditions. Perhaps the fragments of ancient wisdom had found fertile ground once more. What we call the dawn of civilization may not be a beginning. It may be a continuation, a second chapter written on the ruins of the first. Tonight, as we imagine the first cities glowing beneath moonlight, their walls reflecting in calm rivers, we begin to see the ancient world not as the birthplace of human greatness, but as its return. Even as new civilizations rose, the past never truly disappeared. It lingered. In the stones beneath their temples, in the shapes of their cities, in the symbols carved into their walls, in the stories whispered by their priests. Every great culture seemed to build upon something older. In Egypt, the earliest dynasties did not invent their sacred sites, they restored them. Temples were rebuilt again and again on the same ancient foundations, each generation layering its own architecture atop the work of ancestors whose names were already forgotten. The Great Pyramid itself stands on a plateau filled with older structures, cut into the bedrock as if the land had long been sacred before the first pharaoh placed his crown upon his head. In Mesopotamia, ziggurats rose on platforms that had been used for worship long before writing recorded their purpose. Each new city inherited the holy places of the one before it, preserving their orientation and geometry. In the Andes, Inca builders constructed their temples directly atop massive megalithic foundations that they could not replicate. Their finest stonework sits on walls that seem to belong to an earlier age, their own craftsmanship resting humbly upon something greater. In Mexico, the Aztecs believed that their capital stood on the ruins of a previous civilization. They called the ancient builders the Toltecs, a legendary people whose knowledge surpassed their own. In every land, the same pattern appears. The greatest monuments are the oldest. The finest stonework belongs to the earliest layers. Later cultures preserve, repair, and imitate, but they rarely surpass. It is as if each civilization inherits a landscape already shaped by hands long gone. These are not coincidences. They are fingerprints, traces of an earlier world that once laid out the sacred geography of the planet, a world whose influence still shapes the places we call holy, a world whose memory lives on in architecture, myth, and ritual. Even the very layout of cities follow ancient patterns: sacred centers, processional avenues, temple complexes aligned with the sun and stars, water systems designed according to cosmic geometry. These designs appear again and again, as if they were copied from a template older than any known culture. A template inherited, a blueprint remembered.
There is a vast silence at the heart of human history. A silence that stretches back beyond the first written words, beyond the oldest inscriptions, beyond the earliest dynasties and kingdoms. It is a silence measured not in years, but in tens of thousands of years. We call this silence prehistory, a time before writing, a time before chronicles, a time before memory was fixed in ink and stone. Yet it is within this silence that most of humanity's story unfolded. For hundreds of thousands of years, people lived, loved, traveled, built, and dreamed. They crossed continents. They adapted to deserts, jungles, mountains, and frozen plains. They survived ice ages and warming worlds. They shaped landscapes and followed rivers that no longer exist. And of all of this, almost nothing remains. Not because it did not happen, but because time is relentless. Wood turns to soil. Cloth becomes dust. Bone dissolves. Cities collapse into hills. Paths vanish beneath forests. Only the hardest materials endure: stone, metal, fired clay. Everything else is reclaimed by the earth. When historians reconstruct the past, they work with fragments: a broken pot, a chipped blade, a fallen wall, a line of faded text. They assemble these pieces into a story that makes sense of what remains. But what remains is only a fraction.
It is the surface of a much deeper ocean. If a great civilization existed before the rise of Egypt and Sumer, it would now lie mostly beyond reach. Its cities would be buried beneath layers of sediment. Its coastlines would be drowned. Its forests would be deserts. Its tools would be rust. Its buildings would be rubble. Its memory would survive only in symbols, in legends, in rituals, in sacred geometry, in the orientation of temples, in the placement of cities. History would remember its shadow, and even that shadow would fade. There are moments when archaeology almost breaks through this silence. A structure appears where none should exist. A tool is found in a layer far older than expected. A city emerges beneath sand or sea. A monument predates the culture that claimed it. Each discovery opens a window, and through that window we glimpse a world that does not fit the official story. But the window is small, and beyond it, the silence remains. Perhaps this is why ancient cultures placed such importance on memory, on oral tradition, on sacred storytelling, on rituals that preserved knowledge without writing. They understood how easily history could be erased. They understood that civilizations rise and fall, that libraries burn, that empires crumble, that languages vanish. And so they encoded their wisdom in stone, in stars, in myth. They built monuments aligned with the heavens. They carved symbols that could survive millennia. They told stories that could be carried across generations. They tried to outlast time. Tonight, as we listen to the silence of the distant past, we begin to understand that history is not only what is written, it is also what is missing. And within that missing space, there may lie the story of a world far older than our own, a world whose voice is faint, but not entirely gone.
What was erased? Every civilization believes its world will last forever. Its cities feel permanent. Its monuments feel eternal. Its knowledge feels secure. But history tells another story. Libraries burn. Temples collapse. Records fade. Languages disappear. What survives is not what was most important. It is what was most durable. In the ancient world, knowledge was kept in fragile forms: papyrus scrolls, leather manuscripts, wooden tablets. Even clay records could be broken, scattered, or buried beyond discovery. When a city fell, its archives fell with it. When an empire collapsed, its memory collapsed as well. The greatest loss of ancient knowledge may have occurred in a single place: the Library of Alexandria. It was not one building, but a vast institution, a center of learning that gathered texts from across the known world. Philosophers, mathematicians, astronomers, geographers, and engineers worked there, copying and preserving the accumulated wisdom of many cultures. It is said that ships entering the harbor were searched for books. Any text found was copied. The original was kept, the copy returned. The library held works on medicine, physics, engineering, astronomy, history, and philosophy. It may have contained maps of ancient coastlines, records of forgotten nations, descriptions of technologies now lost. And then it vanished. Over centuries of war,
fire, and neglect, the library was destroyed, its scrolls burned, its scholars scattered, its knowledge erased. What we know of the ancient world is only what survived this destruction. But what if the library itself was only the last link in a much older chain? What if it contained copies of texts that were already ancient in its time? Texts inherited from Egypt, from Mesopotamia, from lands now lost beneath the sea, from civilizations whose names no longer exist. If so, then the burning of Alexandria was not just the loss of a library, it was the erasure of a memory. Across the world, similar losses occurred. In China, the first emperor ordered the burning of books to control history. In Mesoamerica, Spanish conquistadors destroyed entire libraries of Maya codices. In Europe, monasteries were sacked and manuscripts lost. In the Middle East, ancient centers of learning were reduced to rubble. Each time, knowledge vanished. Each time, history became thinner. We often imagine progress as inevitable, but progress is fragile. It depends on preservation. It depends on continuity. It depends on memory. When memory breaks, civilization stumbles. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of a lost ancient civilization is not that its cities fell, it is that its story was erased. We may be walking across the ruins of worlds we no longer know how to name, sailing above harbors we no longer remember, building cities on roads whose original purpose has been forgotten. Tonight, as we imagine shelves of scrolls turning to ash and wisdom dissolving into smoke, we begin to feel how close we are to the edge of forgetting, and how much of our own past may already lie beyond reach.
The pattern of rise and fall. When we step back from the details of history and look at the long arc of time, a pattern begins to emerge. Civilizations rise. They flourish. They reach heights of power and knowledge. And then, slowly or suddenly, they fall. The names change. The places change. The languages change. But the rhythm remains the same. Sumer rises from the river plains and builds the first cities. Then it fades into memory. Egypt dominates the ancient world for millennia. Then it becomes a province of empires. Greece fills the Mediterranean with philosophy and art. Then its city-states crumble. Rome conquers the known world. Then it fractures and collapses. The Maya build towering cities in the jungle. Then their cities are abandoned. Angkor rises in Southeast Asia with vast temples and reservoirs. Then the jungle reclaims it. Every civilization believes it has mastered time. Every civilization believes it has learned from the past. And every civilization eventually joins the ruins. From the air, the world is filled with the remains of fallen empires. Cities swallowed by forests, roads buried under sand, harbors turned into swamps, temples broken into stone fields. The earth is a museum of lost worlds. And yet, we rarely ask the deepest question. What if this pattern extends far beyond written history? What if the civilizations we know are only the most recent in a much longer cycle?
The rise and fall of Sumer and Egypt happened within a few thousand years, but humanity has existed for hundreds of thousands. That leaves vast stretches of time unaccounted for. What filled those ages? Were they truly empty? Or were they filled with worlds that rose and fell before anyone learned how to write? We tend to imagine progress as a straight line, but nature prefers cycles. Seasons rise and fall, ice ages come and go, forests grow and burn, oceans rise and retreat. Why should civilization be any different? Perhaps human societies rise when the climate is stable and the land is fertile, and perhaps they fall when the earth shifts, when the sky grows unpredictable, when the sea reclaims the shore. In this view, civilization is not a miracle, it is a phase, a brief moment of order between long ages of chaos. If this is true, then our world is not unique. It is simply the current chapter in a very old book, a book written in stone and water, a book whose earlier pages have been torn away. Tonight, as we imagine countless cities rising and falling across forgotten ages, we begin to see history not as a story with a beginning and an end, but as a wheel, turning, always turning, and carrying humanity through it, through endless cycles of creation and loss.
Long after cities crumble and monuments fall, something remains, not in stone, not in metal, not in written words, but in us. Across cultures and continents, humans carry the same ancient instincts, the same deep responses to certain places, the same fascination with ruins, stars, oceans, and distant horizons, the same pull toward stories of lost worlds and forgotten ages. It is as if part of us remembers. When we walk among ancient ruins, we feel a strange familiarity. When we stand before massive stone monuments, we feel small yet connected. When we look out over the ocean, we feel both wonder and longing. When we gaze into the night sky, we feel that the universe is not entirely chujoi. These emotions do not come from books, they come from something older. Our ancestors lived through ice ages and floods. They watched coastlines vanish. They crossed continents on foot. They followed rivers that no longer flow. They stood beneath skies filled with stars long before cities drowned them in light. They survived catastrophe. They adapted to changing worlds. They rebuilt after destruction. Their memories shaped their children shaped the next generation, and so on through thousands of years. Even when stories fade, instincts remain. We are drawn to water because our ancestors lived by rivers and seas. We fear fire because our ancestors saw forests burn. We fear the dark because predators once hunted us there. We are fascinated by the sky because it once guided our survival. And perhaps we are drawn to the idea of a lost civilization because somewhere deep within us we know that worlds can vanish. We know that what seems permanent is not. We know that the earth can change. We know that everything we build stands on borrowed time.
The idea that we might not be the first civilization does not frighten us. It feels familiar. It feels natural. It feels like something we have always known but never spoken aloud. Perhaps the memory of a forgotten age lives not in ruins or legends alone. Perhaps it lives in the collective human mind, in the way we tell stories of golden ages and great falls, in the way we imagine ancient worlds more advanced than our own, in the way we search the past for signs of a deeper truth. We are a species that remembers, even when it forgets. Tonight, as we drift between sleep and waking, we carry with us the echoes of countless generations. We carry the weight of vanished lands and drowned cities. We carry the shadow of worlds that came before. And in that shadow, we feel a quiet certainty. We are not the first to stand here. We are not the first to build. We are not the first to dream of eternity. We are simply the latest to inherit a very old Earth.
The world that watches us. High above the turning Earth, the planet moves through a silent ocean of stars. From space, our cities glow like constellations scattered across the night side of the world. Highways trace shining lines across continents. Ports sparkle along coastlines. The pulse of modern civilization is visible from orbit, a delicate web of light wrapped around a living planet. It looks permanent. It feels powerful. It seems unstoppable. And yet, when seen against the scale of time, it is only a brief moment, a flicker. The Earth has watched oceans rise and fall. It has watched mountains rise and crumble. It has watched forests turn to deserts and deserts bloom into grasslands. It has watched ice cover continents and then retreat again. Long before our cities existed, the planet turned beneath alien skies. Long after they are gone, it will continue its quiet journey through space. From the perspective of the Earth, civilizations are like waves. They rise, they break, they fade back into the sea of time. Each one believes itself to be the peak. Each one believes it has learned from the past. Each one believes it has mastered nature. And each one eventually becomes a layer in the geological record. Our roads will become stone. Our towers will become hills. Our harbors will become reefs. Our satellites will fall from the sky. The forests will return. The rivers will change course. The oceans will reclaim the shore. And somewhere far in the future, another intelligence may walk across the ruins of our world and wonder, who built this? What kind of civilization lived here? Why did it disappear? They may find fragments, a wall of concrete here, a bridge foundation there, a buried city beneath sediment, a forgotten data center sealed inside a mountain. They will piece together a story from what remains, just as we do now. They will wonder if we were the first, and perhaps they will feel the same quiet doubt that we feel when we stand among ancient stones and drowned cities. Perhaps they will ask the same question, was there a world before us? The Earth will not answer. It never does. It keeps its secrets beneath layers of rock and water.
It records history not in words, but in sediment and ice. It preserves memory in mountains and coral reefs. The planet watches. It always has. It watched the first humans walk across empty plains. It watched the last glaciers melt. It watched the seas rise and swallow ancient lands. It watched cities rise from riverbanks and turn to dust. And now it watches us, building, expanding, reaching for the sky. We stand on the edge of a long story, not at the beginning and not at the end, just somewhere in the middle. Tonight, as the world turns beneath distant stars, we begin to feel how small our moment truly is, and how vast the forgotten past may be.
The question that refuses to fade. There are questions that follow humanity through time. They linger in philosophy and religion. They echo in myth and science. They rise again and again, no matter how often we believe we have answered them. One of these questions stands quietly at the edge of history. Were we really the first? It appears whenever a new ruin is discovered, whenever an ancient city is found beneath sand or sea, whenever a monument defies its supposed age, whenever a map shows a world that should not exist. It appears when archaeologists uncover tools in layers older than expected, when engineers study stonework that seems too precise for its era, when astronomers realize that ancient cultures tracked celestial cycles with astonishing accuracy. It appears when we stand before megaliths and feel that they belong to a different age. It appears when we read flood myths from opposite sides of the planet and hear the same story repeated in different voices. It appears when we look at the oceans and imagine the drowned lands beneath their surface. For a long time, this question was easy to dismiss. It belonged to speculation, to imagination, to fringe theories and forgotten legends. But as science advances, as technology allows us to scan beneath forests, deserts, and seas, the past is becoming less silent. Ground-penetrating radar reveals buried cities. Sonar maps the shapes of submerged coastlines. Satellite imagery exposes ancient roads and riverbeds. Ice cores preserve climate records stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. Each discovery pushes the timeline farther. Each discovery makes the world more complex. Each discovery reminds us that the story of humanity is far larger than any single civilization. Perhaps one day, beneath the waves or under layers of stone, a discovery will be made that changes everything. A city older than all others, a harbor from a vanished coastline, a temple aligned with stars from a forgotten sky, a record of a world erased by water and fire. Until then, the question remains. It waits in the shadows of ruins. It drifts beneath the surface of the sea. It sleeps beneath deserts and ice. And it lives in the human mind. Because deep down, we know how fragile civilization is. We know how easily knowledge can be lost. We know how quickly the earth can change. We know how short our moment is compared to the age of the planet.
We sense that the past is not as empty as it seems. We feel that something has been forgotten. And so, generation after generation, the same idea returns. A world before our world. A civilization before our civilization. A time when humanity may have already risen and fallen. Tonight, as we rest beneath a sky filled with ancient stars, we allow the question to remain unanswered. We do not force it into certainty. We let it breathe. We let it drift. We let it remind us that history is not finished revealing its secrets, and that the earth still has many stories left to tell.
There is a moment in every great search when the horizon begins to glow. It is the moment when questions outnumber answers, when old assumptions begin to soften, when the shape of the unknown starts to take form. We live in such a moment now. Never before has humanity had the tools to look so deeply into the past. Satellites circle the earth, mapping hidden landscapes beneath forests and sand. Sonar sweeps the ocean floor, revealing valleys, cliffs, and structures long submerged. Ice cores draw long lines through time, recording ancient climates in layers of frozen memory. The planet is slowly opening its archive, and with every new discovery, the boundaries of history expand. In the Amazon rainforest, LiDAR scans have revealed vast networks of ancient cities hidden beneath the canopy. Roads stretch for kilometers, earthworks shape the land, settlements appear where no one believed civilization could thrive. In the deserts of the Middle East, satellite images show long-forgotten trade routes, buried canals, and ancient towns swallowed by sand. In the Arctic, melting ice revealed tools and camps from worlds long gone. And beneath the seas, entire landscapes rise again in digital form. River valleys, coastal plains, mountain ridges, plateaus where people once walked. We are beginning to see the earth as it once was, not just as a frozen moment in the present, but as a living world that has worn many faces. What was once speculation is slowly becoming research. What was once legend is now a hypothesis. What was once dismissed is now being measured. And yet, the deeper we go, the more we realize how much remains hidden. Most of the ocean floor is unexplored. Most of the desert is unmapped. Most of the jungle is unexcavated. Most of the past is still buried. We stand on the edge of discovery, looking into a vast and silent sea of time. Somewhere beneath that silence may lie the remains of the first great cities. Somewhere beneath ancient shorelines may rest the harbors of a lost world. Somewhere beneath forgotten river valleys may sleep the foundations of civilizations older than all written memory. The earth does not reveal its secrets quickly. It reveals them slowly, patiently, layer by layer, generation by generation. Tonight, as we imagine researchers tracing ancient coastlines across digital maps and explorers diving into drowned valleys, we begin to feel the quiet thrill of standing at the edge of a long-awaited revelation. Not the end of a mystery, but the beginning of a deeper understanding. The story of humanity is not finished. It is only beginning to remember itself.
We are not alone in time. When we look at ourselves, we see a young civilization. We see glass towers reaching for the clouds. We see machines that circle the planet in minutes. We see knowledge flowing instantly across oceans. We see a world connected by invisible threads of light. It feels unprecedented. It feels extraordinary. It feels like the peak of human achievement. And yet, when measured against the age of the Earth, our world is only a moment, a single breath in a story that has been unfolding for billions of years. The planet has carried life through ice ages and infernos. It has endured asteroid impacts and volcanic winters. It has watched species rise and vanish. It has seen oceans form and mountains crumble. And through it all, it has kept turning. If civilizations rise when the world is stable and fall when the world changes, then perhaps we are not unique. Perhaps there were others. Perhaps long before our satellites traced the globe, other minds once charted the stars. Perhaps long before our ships crossed the oceans, other sailors once mapped forgotten seas. Perhaps long before our cities filled the night with light, other cities once glowed along coastlines that no longer exist. We stand on a planet shaped by many histories, most of them erased. The Earth is not empty of the past, it is layered with it. Every mountain range is a memory of ancient tectonic forces. Every desert is the echo of vanished rain. Every ocean shelf is a drowned continent. Every ruin is a message from another age. We are not alone in time. We walk among the remains of countless worlds. Some we recognize, some we misinterpret, some we have not yet found, and some may be so old that they exist only as whispers in legend and instinct. When we imagine a civilization before us, we often picture something strange and distant, but perhaps it was not so different from our own. People lived, children were born, cities grew, knowledge was shared, dreams were dreamed. They believed their world would last. They believed they were the future. And then the earth changed. The sea rose. The sky darkened. The land shifted. The rivers moved. And their world became part of the deep past. We may not remember their names, but we may be walking across their shorelines. We may be building above their harbors. We may be sailing over their cities. Tonight, as we imagine countless civilizations rising and falling beneath the same stars, we begin to feel that history is not a straight line. It is a long procession, and we are only one chapter in a book far older than we can imagine. At the end of every long journey, there is a moment of stillness, a moment when the road fades into the horizon, when the questions settle into quiet space, when the mind drifts between knowing and wondering. And in that space, the earth continues to turn. Beneath the same stars that guided ancient sailors, above the same oceans that once covered forgotten lands, across the same continents shaped by fire, water, and time. We stand on a planet older than memory. We walk across ground that has worn many faces. We build on layers of worlds that came before. We inherit the silence of ages we can no longer hear. And yet, sometimes, when the world grows quiet, we feel it. A presence beneath our feet, a depth beneath the surface of history, a sense that the past is not gone, only hidden. The civilization before us may never be found in full. Its cities may lie beneath kilometers of water. Its roads may be dust beneath deserts. Its temples may be mountains now. Its libraries may be ash carried by ancient winds. But its shadow remains, in the stones that refuse to fit the timeline, in the maps that show a world that no longer exists, in the myths that remember a flood that reshaped the earth, in the instincts that tell us worlds can rise and fall. We are not standing at the beginning of history. We are standing in the middle of a long story, a story written in ice and fire, in oceans and mountains, in ruins and stars. A story where civilizations rise when the earth is kind and fade when the planet reshapes itself once more. Perhaps one day, far in the future, another people will walk across our ruins. They will wonder who we were, how we lived, why we disappeared. They will study our monuments. They will decode our symbols. They will piece together fragments of our world. And they will ask the same question we ask now. Was there a civilization before us? And in that moment, we will become legend, just as the forgotten world before us has become legend, just as Atlantis became a story, just as the flood became myth, just as the Golden Age became memory. The earth will keep its secrets, but it will never forget. It carries every civilization within its layers. It preserves every world in stone and water. It remembers every chapter, even when we do not. Tonight, as the modern world sleeps and the stars turn slowly overhead, we leave the question where it belongs. Not answered, not dismissed, but alive. Because some mysteries are not meant to be solved, they are meant to be remembered. And somewhere, beneath the oceans and deserts and forests of this ancient planet, the civilization before us still waits, silent, patient, and timeless.